You don't want Garrett Bradbury to start at center. Maybe you want to look to the draft for that. Maybe there's that kid from Iowa. Let's talk about him on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. And today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. This Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off of $500. Use code LOCKEDON at checkout. Today, I want to talk to you about centers. And specifically, how do we find competition for Garrett Bradbury, right? I think we all agree he shouldn't be anointed with the starting job. Kevin O'Connell has spoken very highly of him. Could be coach speak. So let's, for now, operate under the assumption that the Vikings are not satisfied with Garrett Bradbury as their center. Now, that could be, Chris Reed competing at center, or Jesse Davis or something like that. They could do something like that. That's totally an option, and they may have not even made a decision about that yet, and it depends on how the draft itself goes. But otherwise, we look to the draft, and we say, who are these rookie centers that we can bring in and have, a guy that really comes in and solves that Bradbury problem? Of course, the guy, I probably get a message or somebody asking me, like, every day, hey, what about Tyler Linderbaum at 12? And I've talked about him a little bit, and you kind of probably know my thoughts if you're a daily listener. But Tyler Linderbaum is consensus best center in the draft, right? One of the top interior offensive linemen in general in the draft, unless you want to count like Evan Neal or Ikem Ekwonu as interior guys, because technically they could play guard or whatever. But Tyler Linderbaum is a consensus first rounder, I would probably call him. He's maybe a first/second rounder. I could see him falling to like 40-ish, but not much further than that. But more than likely, he goes before pick 30, and he goes somewhere in the bottom part of the first round. So that's a guy, hey, the Vikings need a center. Bradbury isn't getting it done. Let's go take the center. So let's talk about him. So what I'm going to do is give you a baseline, because I am going to compare Bradbury and Linderbaum pretty tightly here. And to do that, I am going to give you a quick baseline. I've pulled up Garrett Bradbury's old scouting reports from back in 2019 and his athletic scores and stuff like that. And let me just read some stuff off to you. So this is from Dane Brugler, who says that he's quick off the ball. He flies out of his stance to reach the three technique. We're very familiar with that about him. He's an excellent on-the-move run blocker. He can gain leverage. He explodes into defenders. He has really good timing on combo blocks. He consistently blocks past the whistle with the bulldog mentality to finish every play. He's innately motivated. He doesn't allow injuries to greatly affect his play, and he had a really good start streak as an offensive lineman for the Wolfpack at NC State. Weaknesses: an undersized with a squatty frame. His lack of length and girth can be exposed versus long-armed rushers. We know that. Grappler at the point of attack, but he's not an overpowering blocker. He'll struggle in pass protection when he misfires with his punch. It leaves him overextended and controlled. He has inconsistent habits in pass protection, which leave him on the ground too much. And he will fall off of second-level blocks when he sacrifices his balance. And some stuff about some old injury things. And the overall is that Bradbury is a center-only prospect. He will struggle at times in pass protection due to his size, but he is an elite-level run blocker due to his athleticism and grip strength. He projects as a long-time NFL starter in his own base scheme. Athletically, so he weighed in at 296 at the combine. That's really, really light for a center. And he tested really well everywhere else. He had a 7.133 cone. That's super elite for a center. He had a 9-foot broad jump. That's really good for a center. He had a 5.04 40-yard dash. That's really good for a center. So you kind of get this idea. This really athletic center that's maybe a little bit too small, but he's got all the agility to match. And he's going to struggle in pass protection, but you're getting a lot of run blocking for it. Sounds like Garrett Bradbury, right? And think about, that was his scouting report. So think about how you felt when the Vikings drafted that, right? Or think how you would feel if the Vikings drafted that. knowing what you know now about Bradbury, right? You probably feel some regret. You go, man, it screamed at us that he wasn't going to be good at pass protection. Now he's bad at pass protection. We're in the situation. This sucks, right? You might think of some regret with that. Well, here's the deal. I have lied to you. Everything I just said is Tyler Linderbaum's scouting report. All of that is Linderbaum. He's the one that weighed in at 296. He's the one that is talked about as a really good reacher, and he's agile, but he's going to struggle in pass protection against long-armed and bigger nose tackles. He's the guy without the physicality. And he weighed a little bit bigger at his pro day, but obviously that's, is that going to be his playing weight, right? The dude's scouting report looks exactly like Bradbury. Now, be honest. You believed that was Garrett Bradbury. You believe that everything I said, yeah, that's Garrett Bradbury. That's what we know Garrett Bradbury to be. And that is Tyler Linderbaum. So the point of doing all of this wasn't to just pull a sneaky on you, but to show you that you're really buying into the same style of play. Now, they're not the exact same guy, right? Tyler Linderbaum, I think, has a little bit better footwork. That was a weakness for Bradbury that he really has never been able to overcome. And in pass protection, Linderbaum has better footwork, and it means teaching him to anchor is going to be a little easier than it would be for Garrett Bradbury, who still struggles with that. Also, Linderbaum's a little younger. Bradbury was 24 coming out, and Linderbaum was 22. But a quick note about age, you got to tell me why that matters with this particular situation. Like, it's not like the 22-year-old is going to hit a growth spurt, all right? He's not that late a bloomer. And like a 22-year-old it's not like he's a 19-year-old, right? Where it's actually super impressive that he's, getting all of this production at this age, not like the Tremaine Edmonds thing. So I'm not convinced that if we drafted Bradbury 2 years before we did, it would have been a better pick or anything like that. So here's the deal. Linderbaum is Bradbury, all right? I hope I can convince you of that by the end of this, but he's Bradbury with slightly different skills, maybe a little bit of a leg up on Bradbury, but I want you to think about where you would take Garrett Bradbury in an NFL redraft. And your answer can be, I wouldn't draft him. Maybe you think he should be an undrafted free agent. I probably wouldn't go that far. 5th round, 6th round, 3rd round, would you take him in the 1st again and just hope, coaching does better this time? How would you do it? And I want you to think about that while I talk to you about Blue Nile. Whether she prefers a statement piece or everyday subtle elegance, BlueNile.com has fine jewelry options for every mom. Whether she prefers a statement piece or everyday subtle elegance, BlueNile.com has fine jewelry options for every mom. Shop high-quality classic diamond earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, or gemstone pendant necklaces. Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 available via phone or chat to help you make your choice, and you can mark this Mother's Day with something enduring. So this Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Vikings listeners get $50 off $500. This podcast exclusive is only good through Mother's Day, so use code LOCKEDON. That's code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all one word. Plus, every order is insured, ships for free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away the gift that's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Today is Wednesday, and that means on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, I am picking for the Vikings in the ultimate mock draft. It is pick number 12. The Vikings are on the clock. I also tried really hard to trade down, so go find out if I was successful there, or if not, who I picked. Go check that out. There's also the live draft coverage show that we're going to do, which is going to be on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page. Go check that out as well. Let me keep talking about Linderbaum. So I hope you thought about where would you take Bradbury in a redraft? My take is that Linderbaum shouldn't be that far off of that for you. And here's the deal. Linderbaum is going to be a first rounder. I am not sitting here telling you Linderbaum shouldn't be a first rounder. But I also thought Bradbury should have been a first rounder. And I think it's just that those takes need to align for you. If you don't think Bradbury should have been a first rounder, I say embrace the take and be like, nah, Tyler Linderbaum can't pass protect and he weighs 296. That dude's a 4th rounder. Just say it. And I say, you know what, caution to the wind and do it. I won't do that because I'm a bigger fan of Bradbury, but if you're not, own it. And I think that can get you to think about what is it about Bradbury that you dislike so much, right? And don't say he gives up lots of sacks. Why? What is it about, what would you fix about Bradbury if you had the genie from Aladdin come in and you could change whatever you wanted about him? Would you give him more beef? Would you give him better footwork? What would you do with his hands? How would you fix Bradbury? And does Tyler Linderbaum accomplish that? I don't think he does. So here's the way that I do this. I do a horizontal draft board that is similar to the way NFL teams do it because I'm trying to do the most faithful simulation that I can. So each position, I kind of try to tier it out and I say, okay, here's the guys I'd pick at 12. Here's the guys I'd trade up for. Here's the guys I'd trade down for. Here's who I'd pick at 46 or 77 with trade ups and trade downs, and etc. For me, Linderbaum is going in the trade up from the third round stage. That is a scorching hot take, and I understand, but bear with me. I do not think Tyler Linderbaum's a third round prospect. That would be way too hot a take, and he's clearly good for that. But the reason he is going to go high is because of his explosive run game ability, because of the same reason Garrett Bradbury did. And the NFL is going to keep taking centers like this because they like centers like this that can reach block really incredibly and can combo up to the second level and can be really effective in space and be really explosive. That turns from a role player to a weapon, and that's what you can get in a center with a guy like Tyler Linderbaum. The thing is, if you're interested in that at the cost of pass protection, the Vikings already made that devil's bargain. And so to trade a first round pick to do it again, to me, would be totally asinine. So let me reframe this again if I haven't already convinced you. Imagine one of the things you can select in the draft is an extension of Garrett Bradbury for 3 more years onto his additional contract. And let's say you can decide to spend a draft pick on that and you don't have to spend money on that. You can spend whatever the rookie contract would be, which is essentially what I'm kind of saying Tyler Linderbaum is with a few tweaks in there, right? But as a baseline, imagine that is an option. So first think, let's say you heard the Vikings are working with Garrett Bradbury on a long-term extension. What would your reaction to that be? I don't think I would like it, and I'm like Garrett Bradbury's last fan. So I have to imagine I would see smoke come out your ears, right? So imagine they signed Garrett Bradbury to a 3-year extension, but they got the opportunity to spend a draft pick to do that instead of cap dollars. And the cap number got to stay really low. So you got to stay really cheap at center, but you had to spend a draft pick to do it. What is the highest draft pick you'd be willing to spend to do that, right? Now, you might not want to do it at all. You might say, I don't want to spend a draft pick. I don't want to extend Garrett Bradbury at all. I am sympathetic to this. Don't draft Tyler Linderbaum then. For me, a third round pick feels fair for that because being able to stay cheap at that position is great. And I also am not as big of a hater of Garrett Bradbury. So I think committing to him isn't the repulsive idea to me as it is to you. But I want to respect your wishes, person who probably hates Bradbury because everybody does. But that's like a way to think about it. And I want to think about Linderbaum not as a place on the consensus board, right? He's probably going to end up somewhere around 20th on the consensus board. That doesn't mean he should go. That doesn't mean if the Vikings are up at 20, they should take him because he's not worth that to the Vikings. Take a team like the 49ers instead. The 49ers have Alex Mack, who's getting up there, and they could use a succession plan for him. So interior offensive line has been a need for them in the draft, right? So if they took Tyler Linderbaum in the first round and they kind of had him be the heir apparent to Alex Mack, and maybe you even like move into guard for a year or something like that, or move Mack to guard or figure that out, right? An easy problem to solve, and moved on that way. Well, they're gaining something that they didn't have before. The Vikings would be spinning their wheels because of what they already have. And that's why my horizontal big board is a Vikings specific one. I am not saying Tyler Linderbaum is not a first round talent. I'm saying if he is a first round talent, the Vikings shouldn't be in on that bidding war. And they should only get in on it if he starts falling precipitously. And that precipitously I defined as if he falls to the third round. Otherwise, I'm way more in it. Take Kyle Hamilton if he falls. Take Stingley if he's there. Go up for one of those guys if you want to, or go down and pick McDuffie or do whatever you want to do. I'm way more into that conversation than I am into basically picking Big Ten Garrett Bradbury with slightly better feet and 2 years younger and spending a first round pick to essentially spin your wheels and then have the exact same thing every week where you're looking up how much their nose tackle weighs to see are we going to be miserable today. That would be a little bit too samey. Although, I don't know, this whole offseason's been really samey to the last few years, so maybe they'll do it anyways. I don't know. Here's the other thing, too. Linderbaum hasn't been mocked to the Vikings that I've ever seen at 12. I don't think I've seen it once. Maybe in like a trade down mock, or like I'm sure people have done it in their simulations that they posted screenshots of. But I've never seen like a writer do a 32-team mock draft and put Linderbaum in. So I don't think this is a very realistic option. It's just one that I get asked about a lot. However, this doesn't mean that my take is let's just give Bradbury the job and keep him there forever. I think Garrett Bradbury should be in a competition for his job this camp. I think he should He should have to beat someone. Now, that someone I always thought of to be like, I don't know, third or fourth round pick. That's not a first round pick, right? You don't spend a first round pick on a guy you intend to compete for the job unless it's one of those things where they're really just competing their rookie year as they develop, or it depends on how developmental they are. But I'm not spending a first round pick unless that guy is like the long-term plan. And if Linderbaum is the long-term plan, you might as well have made Bradbury the long-term plan and spend cap dollars, which would be pretty cheap probably, right? Like that would not be $10 million a year or anything like that. So you'd probably spend way less resources on your undersized, explosive run game zone-only center. If you want that, I would much rather spend cap dollars than a first-round pick on it. But let's look into how to get competition for Bradbury, because I don't just want to complain and say this isn't an answer I like. If I'm going to do that, I want to put forth one that I do like. And I don't know if I'll find one, but let's at least consider some of the third round centers out there. So there's a few guys that I want to talk to you about. But first things first, let me talk to you about Grambling. You can bet on all this stuff. You can bet on like who the first O-line will be off of the board. If it's Aquanu or if it's Evan Neal or if you think it's going to be somebody else, you can bet on that. You can bet on all sorts of draft props, including stuff like who's going to go at 11 or 12. Derek Stingley's over-under for draft position is 11.5. Jamison Williams's is 12.5. I said I hadn't heard those rumors before, but apparently the Sharps have, because he's about going around where the Vikings pick according to the betting markets. So you can go peruse that at Bet Online or make a bet yourself. You can also bet on basketball playoffs. Rip Wolves fans, sorry about last night. You can bet on hockey playoffs, golf, tennis, MMA, whatever you like. So head on over to betonline.net and get yourself a Grambling. Moving on here, let's move off of Linderbaum a little bit. By the way, I wrote a zone coverage article that has a little bit of tape in it and some more evidence, and the same head fake of posting all of his scouting reports and saying that sure sounds like Garrett Bradbury, doesn't it? Psych, it isn't. So go check out that article at Zone Coverage, though. It's the same argument, but with more evidence, more laid out in a way that I can't do in an audio format. But let's talk about some of the other centers here. And here's the problem. A lot of the other centers in this draft are undersized. A lot of these guys are 3.0 something. The only one that's weighed consistently over 310 is Dylan Parham out of Memphis, who I actually really like. And he's, I think, the second center I have on my board. And he's somebody I would pick at 77 pretty happily. And then he competes with Bradbury, and I'd be good with that. And then you have this really good right guard competition with Chris Reed and Jesse Davis, and maybe even Udo or Wyatt Davis as kind of dark horses. And then you have this nice, healthy center competition with Bradbury and somebody kind of pushing him. And then if Dylan Parham wins, he becomes your long-term guy, and that's awesome for a third-round pick. So I would really, really like that. But he's still a guy that has, problems of his own. He's a little bit uncontrolled, I guess, is the way that I'll put it. He can arrive too early. He's not very precise, and he can kind of get caught lunging, get caught being a little too aggressive. But he has the size and reasonable athleticism. I've seen him all over people's boards. I've seen him in the 7th round on some people's boards. I'm one of the people who's a little higher on him. I call him a 3rd round guy, and I'd be really happy with him in the 3rd round. There's somebody like Cole Strange who I'm really into just because of the mean streak and the size and the length. That is one thing that Linderbaum doesn't have that a lot of these guys have. Luke Fortner is another one, is length. And I talked about length a ton last year as we were really focusing on the tackles. And I was talking, Elijah Vera Tucker was like my guy. And he had an arm length thing, and I kind of didn't think that was a big deal. Part of not thinking it's a big deal is that when you have a reach disadvantage, there are things you can do. And we just talked about it with Chris Reed with the snatch and trap that he has, where you grab somebody kind of by the lapel, by their collar, but by the collar of their jersey, and you kind of drag them down. If they get under you and they have a length thing on you, usually they don't have so much length that you can't get a hand on like their breastplate. And then you can kind of drag them down toward the ground and make them lose their balance, because usually when defensive tackles get that low on you, and this also works when you have a size disadvantage, because those bigger, stouter defensive tackles that are going to have 30 pounds on you, they want to get under you. Low man wins and win that leverage battle and forklift you back. So if that happens, that snatch and trap is something that Chris Reed's really good at. Bradbury has that move, and it's something that you can kind of give to these less lengthy centers. And so if you did draft Linderbaum, that'd be kind of, if I were the O-line coach, it'd be the first thing I'd try to install in him. Somebody like Cole Strange, who has 33-inch arms, doesn't necessarily have to worry about that and can use his reach. If you have a reach advantage, sometimes that can trump a weight advantage because you can win the leverage battle so much more easily. You just have so much more arm to work with where you can get your hands in the right place. And so each of these guys has a different thing that like I would teach them. And if we pick one of these guys, I'll talk about it in more detail. But that I think needs to be the way you parse these guys out because they do get a little bit samey. They're all a little bit undersized. They're all good run blockers. And they all have one issue or other that sort of makes it difficult in pass protection. Luke Fortner out of Kentucky is the one that seems to be the best like producing pass blocker. So if you just want a pass blocker, I've got him in the third round as well. I have him below Dylan Parham and Cam Jurgens, but I would pick any of those guys at 77 happily. But if you are just want pass protection, you're like, screw this stupid run game thing. Don't care. Run game doesn't matter. Just give me a guy who can pass protect. And if you really think that way, I would say you should probably put Luke Fortner above the other two on your board. And honestly, Fortner might be the guy that you want as center. And I think he might be the best value play too. So I'd be super happy with him. But otherwise, it's all about, okay, how much work do I have to do to make this guy a viable player? And like with Bradbury, that ship has sailed, right? He's not gaining the weight. He's going to be 27 when the season starts. He's not going to get more bulk. He is who he is, and you're either okay with that or you aren't. Most Vikings fans aren't. The Vikings themselves might be. But with Tyler Linderbaum, it's the same deal. Can he put on that weight? With somebody like Cam Jurgens, I don't think he can. So he weighed in at 303 at the combine, and that's going to be who he is, right? And that's about what Garrett Bradbury plays at. So he's going to be that small, but he similarly has 33-inch arms. So you can teach him to use his length. You can teach him two-hand punches, right? And to punch when you're an offensive lineman, you don't necessarily want to punch with both your hands simultaneously. You want to kind of do it staggered because you get a little bit more range that way. One arm is longer than two because you can kind of turn your shoulders. And then you can kind of get one punch, knock him off balance, and then the second one can really lock him down instead of both at the same time is a lot easier to counter. Defensive linemen will try to swipe your hands and scissor them and swipe them away. And if you have both hands out at the same time, you're a little more susceptible to that versus if you go 1-2, you kind of make the defensive lineman also have to go 1-2 or lose the rep, make it harder for them. So that is something I would teach to Cam Jurgens if he became the center for the Vikings. I think a lot of people have like a second round grade on him, and I have him in the third round mostly as like a need thing, mostly as a Vikings specific thing, similarly to Linderbaum. Linderbaum is still my number one center. I know I just bashed him for a whole episode. He's still my number one center. It's more about the idea of taking a center. If you're going to do that, that dude needs to be, I think, a different type of guy than the guy you have right now. If you aren't okay with an undersized center that's really good at run blocking, well, Tyler Linderbaum is that, so you should be just as not okay with him as you are with Bradbury. And if you are okay with it, we already have the guy. And that's why I think I said on a mailbag a couple weeks ago, we have Tyler Linderbaum at home and his name is Garrett Bradbury. And if you want to commit to a new name than Garrett Bradbury, don't spend premium capital on that just to get the same kind of guy. So we have a couple episodes left this week. I'll get to stuff. Maybe we'll start talking a little bit more about corners. I've already talked about Kyle Hamilton and the wideouts, and this was one I was really looking forward to doing. So we'll keep talking about stuff and see if we can't get a good handle on the board so that when we do mock drafts. But then next week is draft week, like the week. So I'm really, really excited for that. I'll tell you more at the end of the week about how I plan to handle that stuff. And how I'm going to handle the weekend and content schedule and stuff like that. But for now, get hype. We're getting down to it. Obviously, Linderbaum is prospect of the day, I guess, today. Or you know what? No, Luke Fortner is prospect of the day. Screw it. Let's make it not the first round guy. I'll see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.